How about it for a Pulitzer Prize winner? He is the co-founder of DCReport.org. And when it comes to government policy, the law, taxes, and Donald Trump, for that matter, he's without peer. David K. Johnston, everyone. Hi, David.
Hello, Mark.
So good to have you on board. I first want to bring you into an ongoing controversy on this show and an ongoing conversation we've been having about cluster munitions and the supplying of cluster bombs to Ukraine. And I've mentioned before to the audience that you feel very, I thought, fervently that we should be defending Ukraine to stop this sort of march of Putin. But I wonder if you could speak then to this latest upping of the ante when it comes to munitions.
Well, this is the result of what I think were some serious policy mistakes by the Biden administration and NATO earlier. The Russians have established significant trenching in an effort to hold on to the Ukrainian territory they occupy, especially Crimea. And the Ukrainians, who have shown very, very smart tactics, did not have superior air power. What you would expect to happen if the U.S. or U.S. and NATO allies were conducting a war is that you would first go in with planes, you take out command and control, logistics, particularly fuel dumps and ammunition dumps. And once you have succeeded in attrition against the other side, then you can begin a war of maneuverability. We have not supplied yet the kind of aircraft that are needed for that kind of approach. And so the concern, I suspect, was that they would get bogged down in trench warfare, which could go on for years. And given that the Russians have a much larger population, that's a big concern because the Ukrainians have been very careful to manage what's called their loss ratio in the battlefield. Cluster munitions are described by the Biden administration when Jen Psaki was the press secretary as criminal warfare. But the reason for bringing them in is to deal with the trenches. Now, the United States, Russia, and a few other countries are not signatories to the global agreement about not using these weapons. These primarily are made in China and Korea. There is one U.S. company that's part of Northrop Grumman that makes these. And of course, our U.S. Air Force has a lot of them ready to go. And what happens is you fire an artillery shell that has all these mini bombs on it that get scattered. And depending on what source you look at, somewhere between 1% and 3% of them don't go off. So they're like landmines in the sense that they pose a danger in the future. But the Ukrainians are very focused on trying to cut off Russia's land bridge to Crimea. If you read the Institute for the Study of War or follow other commentators about this, you'll see that they're very focused on this, and that's where there's a lot of trenches. So the Ukrainians absolutely asked for these weapons to overcome their other disadvantages. It would be so much better if we just gave them airplanes. I mean, the purpose of these things is to kill. That's what war is about. It's to kill the soldiers in those trenches. But since they don't have the air power to do it, we don't use, as we did in World War II, those horrible weapons of flamethrowers. This is the apparently next best option, and it's one that can be delivered, quickly deployed, and try to give the Ukrainians an advantage against the entrenched Russian troops.
So it sounds as though you're saying, look, we're kind of backed into a corner here because we mishandled policy early in terms. Now, I suppose also, and I kind of thought you were going to say this, that meaning this part, and I don't know that if this is implied or maybe, let me just be clear on this. The mishandled policy that you were talking about, the planes, et cetera, would that have produced an escalation to the conflict that we were worried about? Why didn't we do that?
I think it's very clear that Biden has been very, very cautious, and so have his advisors, about not escalating, not giving Putin an excuse to do something more. And so, it's a policy choice, but Monday morning quarterbacking, looking in retrospect, I think a mistake. And this is a horrible decision. I don't misunderstand me, but war is a horrible series of decisions. There are no good decisions here. And the Ukrainians need to, this summer, cut off Russian access to the occupied Crimea, which they've occupied since 2014. They need to seriously degrade the capacity of the Russians to continue the invasion of Ukraine. And of course, they're trying to exploit the mutiny by Prigozhin when we don't know what's going on with Prigozhin. And of course, we have to be cautious about everything it's a war. Everybody lies, and information is often hard come by. The U.S. clearly has very, very good intelligence about what's going on. So does NATO. One of the things that I think hasn't gotten any attention is that Ukraine doesn't just want F-16 fighters, which are vastly superior to the Soviet, I think it's called Su-27s. They also want to have real-time access to NATO command and control, as opposed to just their own command and control, because we're giving them lots of intelligence from satellites and other things. And the Russians continue to allow individual soldiers to have unencrypted cell phones, and they use unencrypted communications. So that's been a huge boon to the Ukrainians, that the cheapskating of the Russian army, the corruption in the Russian army has been absolutely essential to this. And, Phineas, in a post here on the site, says that Putin is using cluster bombs and anything he can get, and is having Iran and China make him drones. And yes, the Russians have been using these weapons. They've been putting out mines all over the place. It's very slow work to clear mines. And I think this is an effort to give the Ukrainians the opportunity to cut the Russian landlines to Crimea, which would be a major defeat for Putin. And Putin let's understand, he's not going to give up. He'll wreck his whole country unless somebody inside the Kremlin stops him.
Well, how do you see it ending then, David? I mean,
I have no idea. What I hope happens is that the Ukrainians prevail, because if they don't, I can tell you what will happen. Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Moldova will go soon into under the Kremlin's boot, and so will other countries. By the marriage of one of my children, I have relatives in Slovakia, ethnic Hungarians who live in Slovakia, and they are literally terrified. My two youngest grandsons are just flying back from there today, and the family there is just terrified that if we and the rest of the West don't support and strengthen our support of the Ukrainians, that it's just a matter of time until they're back living under the Kremlin.
The bottom line then on these cluster bombs is you essentially say war is hell. This is a hellish decision. It has to be made. Yeah,
I mean, I'm not aware of other viable options to achieve what we're trying to help the Ukrainians achieve. They may exist. I mean, this is
to cure this problem. You're saying the trench problem. You really need this weaponry, sadly.
Right. And this weaponry, just be real clear, this is not like the Russians who, as a matter of practice going back to the czars, including under the modern czar now, attack women, children, hospitals, schools, train stations. The Ukrainians have not been doing that. They are going to use these weapons to kill soldiers in the trenches or at supply depots. And they've been very good militarily at going after supply depots, both things like fuel and other munitions and foodstuffs, which the Russians have been. I don't want people to think the Russians are entirely stupid in their military, but you can see photos that have been put up on the internet that I think are authentic, showing the way that the Russians have, for example, put a bunch of munitions that just make them unnecessarily vulnerable to attack.
This is an interesting point, by the way, and I know I really want to get onto some of these military confirmations that aren't happening, and some of the holdups and other confirmation. Before I get to it, though, I just see this from time to time from Perry Joe Jim Bob. Obama screwed up letting Russia take Crimea in 2014. That was a real tough spot. Crimea is such a key strategic part of Ukraine, yet you could see the Obama not wanting to get involved because he knew it was a sticky thing militarily and also from the standpoint of diplomacy. Your thoughts?
Well, I don't think he had the congressional support to do anything. I mean, let's not put Obama in a vacuum. He certainly said the right things at the time, but he didn't take the actions that would have been more significant. So, fundamentally, we're going to have to, if we don't want Putin to succeed and then move on to other countries, we're going to have to stick with this. And it would have been a lot better if the war was over now. The sooner it gets over, the better. And the only way it's going to get over soon is for some decisive victories by the Ukrainians. Now, on the other side of that, disrupting the Kremlin top leadership, if Putin gets removed by his own people, don't celebrate that. The people next in line behind him, you can go read up on them on the internet, they are possibly worse than he is.
I was saying before, I think it was last week, I said it reminds me of The Wizard of Oz, where we open and she's just killed the Wicked Witch and they're all excited. And then the other witch shows up and you're thinking as a kid, who's the other witch? I thought she killed the bad witch. And then Glinda, the good witch, says, no, she's worse than her sister. And I think that's true. Based on everything I've read, it's a ruthless crew waiting in line behind Putin, even as ruthless as Putin is. Now, to these Joint Chiefs vacancies that are looming and the Senate standoff. This is craziness that's going on with Tommy Tuberville and the holdup on confirmations of military staff and also staffers across the cabinet, EPA, Justice, State Department, etc.
Well, just as we have seen the Republican Party become the anti-law and order party, and their expressions of desire to defund the tax police, that's who the IRS are, the Securities and Exchange Police, who police our markets, and the Food and Drug Administration, those are the, food and drug police. The party has not leaned on Tommy Tuberville and said, okay, you made your point, now stop. He has placed a hold, which any senator can do, on all military appointments. It's now gone, I believe, 100 days just about now, because if you are a service member and you want an abortion, and remember, we have lots of evidence of women service members being raped by their superior officers and fellow service members, the military will fly you to a location where it's not illegal to have an abortion. So if you're in Texas and you can't get one, they'll fly you to, let's say New York, for example, or California.
At government expense is his point.
At government expense, yes. And, right. I'm sorry, it's not Tuberville's job to manage the decisions of the military to maintain good order and discipline. If the military leaders have decided that this is necessary for good order and discipline, then that's their position. And here's a way to think about that. I've served on a number of nonprofit boards, almost all of them as president of the board. Our job is to manage the executive, not anybody underneath the executive. And Tuberville here is trying to micromanage the military, an area where he has absolutely no knowledge. So we have the Marine Corps without a commandant for the first time in over 100 years, and the only time, to my knowledge, because of a Senate hold. And this is going to happen with other officers. It's going to screw up the whole promotion chain and people's careers. Tommy Tuberville is a living, breathing threat to American national security.
Wow. And of course, there he is. The reality is as well, he's made some loathsome comments. I mean, I'm trying to grotesque, I might even say, about white nationalism in the military, and essentially saying, oh, white nationalists aren't racists. I mean, white nationalists by definition are racists. Craziness.
Of course they are, but he is a white nationalist.
Right.
And so we recognize. There are people out there who will tell you we shouldn't support the Ukrainians because there are Nazis in Ukraine. Well, there's Nazis in America. Should Canada invade us? Canada and Mexico, should they get together and invade us because there are Nazis in America? I mean, it's a ridiculous argument. In the same way here, his assertions that, saying that white nationalists are racist is a matter of opinion just tells you how disingenuous this awful human being is, who ought to go back to being a football coach.
Yeah, that's right. He was a football coach, and that was his last interaction with the military was coaching, I think, one of the military football teams back in 2014. I want to move to Donald Trump, and then I'm going to let you go. David K. Johnston, I think, as I've said before, people have called you a Trumpologist, and you have for a long time told us about tactics that Trump employs to delay, and now Trump does the classified documents trial delayed until after the 2024 election. Not really a surprise there.
Well, no, but think about this. If Donald believes there's no evidence against him and that everything he did was perfectly right, then he should be pressing for a speedy trial so he can put this behind him. This is the best proof that he knows perfectly well that he's going to be convicted, even where this trial is going to be held in an area where the jury pool will come from 3 counties that heavily went for Trump. I think one of them 70% Trump, 30% Biden in the last election. We have federal court rules on grounds for delaying a trial. Running for public office is not one of those rules. On the other hand, this trial is, at least for now, under the direction of Judge Eileen Cannon, a marginally qualified federal judge, Trump appointed, who in earlier proceedings related to this literally said he deserves special treatment, which I think is a clear violation of her oath of office under the Constitution. But you'll notice the Justice Department has not attempted to remove the judge. And if Trump is indeed convicted in her court, in her jurisdiction, that will be a powerful refutation of Trump's claims of innocence. Although, true believer Trumpers, doesn't matter what evidence you find. You could get a videotape of him saying, let me tell you how you can attack the United States with nuclear weapons and we won't respond. And they'll still say, that's a fake. It's the deep state. Because you're dealing with people who simply are not rational about these issues. They've essentially joined a cult.
Yeah, I'll remind everybody, too, that David K. Johnston in his column some time ago, actually, we discussed it again, and I believe I tweeted again, and it became so relevant when these documents were found, and then more documents were found, and then the hiding of the documents was clearly in evidence, and then there's video of them hiding and moving. You had said, hey, this is more than just a guy like starting up a Planet Hollywood with his old souvenirs from when he was president. This is more than just braggadocious, bragging on the part of Trump. You felt that there might have been some transactional aspects to this.
Well, I said last August, I wrote a column saying that Donald would not know how to read national security documents. I have a bunch of them in the house behind me that have been declassified. And there's an art to reading them. And Donald wouldn't have a clue to what they mean and how to interpret them. He wouldn't understand the military plan created at his request for how to invade Iran. But Donald knows value. He knows how to look at a piece of land and go, oh, I could get a lot of money out of that land by doing X, Y, or Z. He took a number of boxes of these documents from Mar-a-Lago to his golf course in Bedminster, New Jersey, when he was meeting with Saudi government officials about creating the new Saudi Golf League, Lviv, I think it's called,
right,
which has been poaching top golfers from the PGA. Well, to think that there weren't any Saudi intelligence operatives in the crew of people who came would just be naive. That doesn't mean anything happened. But why would he take them to Bedminster when he's having this meeting with Saudi officials? And on the other hand, Jack Smith's group has not moved to go after, as I read the documents, to go after those documents in that event. So
yeah, it's interesting that it's interesting. We've talked before about the venue being Florida and this friendly judge to whom you refer. She'll certainly be tested in a way she's never been tested before. I mean, the nation's being tested in a way it's never been tested before. This is higher profile case than she'll ever have or has, ever crossed her desk.
Right. And there's no reason here that I can see for extensive delays in this case. And of course, if Donald were to get back into the White House, which I think is highly unlikely, but were he to get back into the White House, the first thing he'll do is stop all the prosecutions of him and anybody he cares about. He may try to self-pardon. That may or may not work. Depends on how the Supreme Court, if you use their intent. What would the framers of the Constitution have thought in the 1780s about a president pardoning himself? Or they'll conveniently get away from that argument. But he needs to be held accountable. And if he didn't do anything wrong, then a jury should acquit him. And I don't mean a hung jury. I don't mean 11-1 for conviction. I mean, if you didn't do anything wrong, you should expect a jury to come out and say, yeah, we're 12-0 for innocence.
Yeah.
Not going to happen. Not going to happen, Mark.
I don't know, David, honestly, that this trial is going to happen before the presidential election. It just seems as though the delays will be sufficient enough that we may not get it in. But and then everything else.
Then he'll argue that as president, if he wins, he can't be tried because he has to run the country.
Sure, that's the typical argument, right?
Yeah,
that's
so.
I
think it's very important that this trial be conducted as soon as possible, not as late as possible. And similarly, when Fani Willis brings her indictment, which apparently will be in August, as she's alerted the judges in her jurisdiction and the county officials, that should come as soon as possible. And in New York City, the Manhattan DA, it's very clear he's going to file a superseding indictment. That was clear the day the indictment was released. He needs to get with it and get it out there. And I've written 2 pieces in the New York Daily News laying out for Alvin Bragg, here are paths to prosecute Trump. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but it's not that difficult to lay out a path for how to prosecute him.
Such a pleasure to talk to you, David. I'll let you go and just remind everybody you can find David K. Johnston so many different places. Follow him on Twitter for starters. Are you going over to Threads?
I've got an account over at Threads with 200 followers. It's slow going. Twitter has undergone a big change since Threads. You will see a lot more echo chamber by Trumpers, and because a whole lot of people have abandoned Twitter very clearly, or they may have an account there.
I see.
And so the tone I'm noticing is quite changed, Mark.
Yeah, it's sad because it really was a good resource. And I still think, when it comes to even just public safety and following things, we're so sensitive to a lot of these events related to weather and extreme weather events, fire, flood. I still feel as though Twitter is a great go-to, but clearly that platform's changed. I'll let you go, and thank you so much. How about it for David K. Johnston? Thanks, David.
Take care, Mark.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.